The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today our panel is going to be having a discussion about a subject that Brooklyn brought up regarding Judge Luttig, the conservative judge that has been on many of the news services, as he was arguing against the Supreme Court's decision as it relates to removing Trump from the ballot. And it turned into a very interesting conversation as there were many different opinions of the panel regarding the decision and the outcome. We'd also like to mention that our friend and colleague, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, was recording this from a conference she was at. So there's a little bit of background noise, but her input is very important. So let's listen in.
Brings me to a point that I had wanted to discuss, where Mark and I disagree, which is fine, and I understand Mark's point, which is on the ballot, the Colorado, who did find in their court, who did find Trump to be an insurrectionist, and so he has been found an insurrectionist in a court of law, albeit a state court. And I was listening to Judge Luttig, and despite the fact that the judge is a conservative, and I'm sure he and I would disagree on politics, what he has to say, I think, is something that is important to hear, and he made a point that I had not thought of. And I know Mark's point is, and other people's point is, that what the Republicans would do if Trump were removed from state ballots and denied election equality or election access would be to say, well, we don't like Biden and we think he ought to be impeached, or, he should have been impeached, or whatever. And therefore, we're going to impeach him at the state level, and for whatever we say he did, and we're going to knock him off the ballot. And then one has got a patchwork of knocking presidential candidates off the ballot, because of course today's Republican Party is not a normal anything. It's not a party, it's a cult, as we have discussed in the past. And what they're doing is playing prisoner's dilemma and tit for tat, and gearing and escalating upward rather than de-escalating downward, or de-escalating, which is what they should be doing. And Judge Luttig's point was that the states, by the Supreme Court's decision to allow Trump to stay on the ballot, but to give states full permission to control their own elections and their own determination of who's an insurrectionist at the state level, the states can determine that, okay, if so-and-so is an insurrectionist, and we have determined that he is at the state level, he cannot hold any state office of any kind ever again, and so forth. But if that person decides that he wants to hold, or she wants to hold, federal office, they are obliged to allow that person who is not fit at all ever for state office to move on to federal elections as a fit and proper non-insurrectionist candidate. And that's what the Supreme Court has done. They've opened the gateway, because they have said that states are responsible for their own elections, but they have no control over federal elections. So Trump cannot run for state election anywhere in Colorado. Let's say Trump were a resident of Colorado and he wanted to run for state election. He cannot run for state election because he's been found to be an insurrectionist at the state level. But because Colorado, just like in all states, have no control over who is elected at the federal level for any federal office, including president, even if they're found to be an insurrectionist at the state level, they are entitled to run for federal office, even though at the state level they do not qualify because the state has found them to be an insurrectionist. Does that make sense? That's his argument.
It makes sense. All right, so here would be my counter argument to that.
I'm confused. What have I said to confuse you?
You haven't done it. You haven't said anything. I'm going to just.
You haven't said anything to confuse.
Oh, Priscilla is confused. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
No. Well, and I know I'm confused about what you said. I'm confused about the logic behind it because you're saying someone can't hold office at the state level, but that it's okay that they hold it at the federal level, which is kind of just super state. So someone who's an insurrectionist, a recognized insurrectionist, can in fact still run the government, which puts them in a position to actually be a fascist dictator.
Yes.
But they can't do that on the state level. That makes no sense.
That's what Judge Luttig has said the Supreme Court has allowed by allowing Trump to remain on the ballot and saying, states, you have no control over who is on the federal ballot. Only we do. And saying Congress has got to make another law, although the Constitution says anyone who has been found to be an insurrectionist is automatically disqualified from holding federal office. What they did was read it backward or reverse it, what it actually said, and say, oh, no. And then they said, of course, what Congress's legislation is subject to judicial review. So after giving their edict on it, they said Congress has got to create more legislation, which is not what the Constitution says, but then they're going to have to review it again themselves. No, there's no logic to this. And that's Judge Luttig's point.
Okay. Well, Brooke, I would say that Priscilla agrees with you. I have a complete counter argument that of course, will rain on everybody's parade. Scott, where do you stand on this? Before I launch into.
No, please go into it.
All right.
I'll give my opinion after.
You'll do my opinion after. So he's waiting to beat up on me before he wants to hear. All right, here's the deal. You're talking about, first of all, here's my first problem. I have utmost respect for Judge Luttig. I also had the utmost respect for Antonin Scalia, even though I did not agree with him at all. But the fact is that we're trying to create a whole bunch of rules around keeping one person off the ballot without any consideration to what it means going down the road. Now, the idea that somebody in Colorado has been found to be an insurrectionist, but has not been found an insurrectionist in any other state. There's 49 other states that have not found him to be an insurrectionist. Yes, Colorado should have the ability to say you can't run for state office. But even though each state controls the elections, this is a federal election, not a state election. Therefore, taking him off the ballot there, first of all, in Colorado is irrelevant anyway, because it's not like he's going to win Colorado regardless. But the fact is taking him off the ballot there, he has not been found to be an insurrectionist in a federal court yet. Now, if he was found in a federal court, yes, the United States Constitution now kicks in. But, the idea that they're reading it backwards, I have a real issue with that mindset. Because the fact is that when you listen to Judge Luttig, it is an obvious attempt to keep one person from being able to run. When you listen to everyone, that whenever we're talking about Trump, it is always focused upon the person without thinking about what would happen down the road. And my argument is that, yes, the state court, a lower state court, a magistrate, in Texas could find Biden as an insurrectionist. And you could find one probably in even a blue state that will, a conservative judge, that will find him as an insurrectionist. And then under the rules that Luttig is saying should apply, they'd be completely eliminated from running for federal office. So my comment is that, yes, he has been found as an insurrectionist in Colorado. For their state elections, absolutely. But let's make sure we divide this out. Also, remember, there's a difference between state law and federal law. So you have got to find him as an insurrectionist at the federal level. And then that's where this comes in. Let's also take the reverse. Luttig is saying you're taking away the power, and I heard him say this, you're taking away the power of the states. So, of course, there's a lot of things, there's three main things about being eligible to run. So are you saying that a state like, I don't know, Colorado could say, we don't like got to be 30 years old to be a senator? Our state's rights, our power says, we've got this kid that's 27 years old. We think he should be a senator. We're going to ignore that one. And again, but he's running for a federal office. Could they do it at a state level? Could they say, listen, our governor needs to be 30? Could they change the rules for their governor and say, no, this 27-year-old could become the governor? Absolutely. That's within their power to legislate. But they can't legislate the federal rule. So we've got to make sure that we cannot, yes, Trump is a horrible human being. Yes, we all wish that he would go away. Absolutely. But we cannot make rules today that we will regret because of the fear and the idea of removing one human being, all over one human being. Trump could have more of impact on this country for what we do than for what he does. Because if Luttig's opinion was correct, and thankfully, I have to admit, I did not like the reading of the Supreme Court's ruling. I thought it was kind of ham-fisted, but the logic was there. If Luttig's argument was to stand, the issues that we would have down the road would be far greater than the possibility that on November 4th or 5th, whichever date is, Donald Trump gets elected again. I mean, it truly could have implications down the road. So I think there's a lot of attempts. People are making these great arguments, but it's all centered around one person, not around. And Luttig does a good job in kind of interpreting it so that it supports his desire to keep Trump from running. I mean, he's brilliant. He does support it. But if you look at the other side of the coin, that can cause us massive problems. All right, Scott, beat up on me.
I really don't have anything to beat up on you about.
Hey,
sadly, but as much as I wish I could. I mean, here's a weird take on it, right? Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, right? Before he was the president of the Confederacy, he was the United States Secretary of War from 1853 to 1857, and he began the process of moving all of the military assets, the armaments, out of forts all along the all around the country, so that they could not be used against the Confederacy should there be a war, while he was Secretary of War for the United States of America. And when the war was over, he was arrested, accused of treason, and imprisoned, right? And specifically, Jefferson Davis was charged with treason against the United States for arming the 1864 military invasions of Maryland and D.C. during the Civil War, before and during the Civil War. The pre-trial motions, this is 1868, it included the defense asking for a dismissal, claiming that the 14th Amendment already punished Davis by preventing him from holding public office in the future, and that further prosecution would violate the double jeopardy clause. So Andrew Johnson, who's president at the time, was afraid that the court would rule in favor of Jefferson Davis. So what he did was he released an amnesty proclamation. December 25th, 1868, he issued a pardon to everybody who participated in the Civil War. Jefferson Davis walked free without a trial. He had been in prison for 2 years without it before his trial came up. And here's the thing. According to this court decision, it would have taken an act of Congress to prevent him from running for president. He could have, because he was a very popular person in the reconstituted United States of America, a very popular person, could have run for president of the United States. And it would have taken an act of Congress, according to the Supreme Court, to keep him off the ballot. I mean, that kind of sounds amazing, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that's this. To me, it's a very similar thing to this case. We know what Trump did. We saw it. It doesn't matter that, we know what happened on that day, and now we know more about what was happening in the month that preceded it.
Yes.
And really began in motion in about August of 2020, when his team realized that he was going to lose that election. And he started stepping up the whole, they're rigging the election against me, which is, an incredible thing for an incumbent to say.
Right.
And he put it all together, and he had people running it. There are a couple of unanswered questions about the whole thing. The biggest one in my mind is, why didn't he just declare the insurrection acts on January 6th and unleash the hounds, right? We saw yesterday another January 6er was arrested on Friday. Last Friday. He had his pretrial hearing yesterday, and the judge in that hearing said that he needs to stay in prison until his trial can happen, because he's too dangerous to allow to be out on the streets. This guy had a gun with him, climbed up on the scaffolding around the Capitol, pulled out his gun and fired it in the air. We know that other people had guns that day that they brought to the Capitol with them. We know that they were helped to get out of there and not arrested on the spot by other conspirators in this case. And there is no reason that I can see that anybody should support Trump for president. But just like Jefferson Davis before him, he does have a fan base. And so he's going to get to run. And it's simply up to us to make sure that he doesn't win. And so we can argue all these hypotheticals, and we can talk about all these things all we want. But the bottom line is that he's got to be voted. That's not going to be the final word. We know that. Going in, we've all said this before, that he's going to lose this election. I think he's going to lose by a lot. And he's going to declare that it was rigged against him and stir up that base to go out there again and commit violence. And they'll be better at it this time than they were the first time. And this time, I don't think he will hold back like he held back last time. I don't know. Nobody has come forward and said yet why he didn't unleash the hounds. Nobody, as far as I know, that answer is still hanging out there. We don't know why he didn't. We know that the Oath Keepers had a quick reaction force across the Potomac River in Virginia, armed and ready to come into the Capitol and start killing people in Congress and start killing people to take over the U.S. government. They were ready to do that for Trump. Those are the people who were in prison already for the conspiracy that Trump has yet to be tried for, and or even indicted for. But all the arguments in the world are not going to change the facts. And the fact is that the vote's got to get out there, and he's got to be soundly defeated. And we'll take it from there.
And that's my point, is that we can listen to Judge Luttig and we can agree with his opinion, but understanding that if his opinion was to have stood, if he was a Supreme Court justice, which he is not, if it had stood, there's impacts to that decision. We cannot allow, I agree with Scott, we got to beat him. You got to beat him soundly. He will not just go away if he's beaten. That's not going to happen. But it's better than making a rule for one person that impacts the country going forward.
But I think
that is my issue.
Congress needs to clarify that.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I hadn't. Thank you, Scott, for sharing what happened with Jefferson Davis. I hadn't been aware of that. I don't know if it's intended for just one person, what Judge Luttig had to say. I would think it would be for going forward, given the fact that here we are now, which is certainly not ever where I thought we would ever be. With one party completely enabling the candidate and bowing and scraping and kissing the floor and all that kind of stuff.
Which brings up the point that it is for one person. This never happened before.
I know, but it could happen again.
Well, yeah, and the sun could not come up tomorrow, but I mean, who knows? The fact is that everything that's being talked about is about one person because it's never happened before. And we can't react in such a way, as we've said so many times, we can't react against our own best interests. And something like this would be against our own best interests. And I think one of the things that Scott said that was interesting with Jefferson Davis, he was found by a federal court, Jefferson Davis, of treason. I mean, that's a federal court was going to be doing that. Not a state court.
He never went to trial. He was indicted.
Right, he never went to trial, but it was a federal court that was going to do it, not a state court. Not even one of the state courts of the North. To say that you are an insurrectionist against the United States, in my mind, has to come from a United States federal court, not a state court. If we allow the state courts to do this, that opens it up to every magistrate. And let's remember, the trial was held in Colorado. It was not a judge that made this determination. It was a jury. You know, I always say those 12 people not smart enough to get out of jury duty. This is what you're going to end up with in every state. You're going to be able to find 12 people in every state that could find Brooklyn and Weldon as an insurrectionist if they want it bad enough. And I just, to me, that's that's totally frightening. Yes, the Congress does have to correct this. It's a mess. But the only reason we're even talking about this is because of one person. And to make those rules just to make sure that one person goes away, because we're afraid. And there are people that are afraid that he's going to get elected again. They don't believe, like Scott does, that he's good. Well, Brooklyn, you believe. You're truly frightened of it. Scott thinks that Biden's going to get 100,000 votes.
100 million.
100 million votes. Yeah, it's going to be 100,000 votes will be cheated. Okay. That's how that's going to work. And if you also know, if the election was run today compared to 2020, the Electoral College has changed. Trump would be 2 more votes closer. Biden would lose 2 votes because of the demographic shift. So, I mean, to me, get rid of the Electoral College. That's the thing to be the most afraid of. That's the thing everyone should be afraid of, because Biden could get 100 million votes and lose if he doesn't win the right states?
Thinking about it hypothetically, now, taking out the impact of, the state's decisions and all of that, but kind of going back to what Brooke is saying, whatever comes out of right now is a precedent layer, right? So if we don't do something, we are leaving it open for this to happen again. This is the first time that we've had to deal with it at the magnitude that we've had to deal with it since the Civil War, right? So this is a new narrative that we're constructing as we go along. So should there be something? Sure. Should it be at the federal level versus state level? Whatever makes most sense legally. But this, I think, goes beyond one person. I think this is one person who is reminding us of previous one persons in other countries, and we had never wanted that one person to be in our country, and now we're facing it. And so what do we do about it to make sure we don't go the direction of those other countries?
Not that long ago, Priscilla, we were worried that Ron DeSantis would be the smarter version of Trump, right? And that we would really be in trouble. Yeah.
Don't hold back, Priscilla. Tell us what you really think.
And so for listeners at home, Priscilla just stuck her fingers all the way down her throat. But Ron DeSantis turned out to not have that thing that Trump has, which is charisma or some kind of appeal to people, and that makes them lose their minds. And he was an ordinary politician who didn't quite translate onto the national stage the way he has, I guess, in Florida. But there is no other Trump looming out there anywhere, as far as I can tell. He is kind of a unique individual, and he's been training for this his entire life, or at least since the Russians hooked him up with Ivana and began to groom him for the presidency so that they could rule the world someday. That's a good conspiracy theory right there, isn't it?
That's a great conspiracy theory. I like it a lot. That's why also we probably will never do video because the faces that we make, we probably just won't ever do video.
But by the way, the people in Colorado who filed that suit were the Republicans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody accused me of why can't the Democrats just leave the guy alone? They're always trying to go take him to court. And I said, this is not the Democrats who did this. This is the Republican Party of Colorado. The Republicans don't want to keep losing, and they don't want to keep hitching their wagon to this guy.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium offering social issue solutions to NGOs and international government agencies through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Podkite, who does all our analytics, iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source of music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.